Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilk plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was no one left to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes. It's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason stay strapped with logic and fast. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason.
Hi, welcome. I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Mark Reimers.
This is Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Today we're going to be joined by Skype by John Figdor, who's written Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart, and we'll get to that in about 15 minutes. My co-host here is the perfect exemplar of an atheist mind and humanist heart. So we're going to talk about some news items that tie into both of those today. Mark, first just tell us, why were you up in Fairfax that you were able to come into our studio today?
Hi, Rob. I was giving a talk at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fairfax on brains, genes, and morality, about the biology of morality, which I think will tie into John Figdor's book today. And we're just talking about different aspects of neuroscience that give us some insight into how morality came to be. And there's not really, a moral center to the brain. There's not a single place, but rather different parts of the brain that evolved for various purposes, many of them social interaction, have been repurposed and become parts of our moral circuitry. And so there's not a single morality, but rather multiple considerations in morality. And I think this helps us understand how we can address sort of moral deficits and moral training.
Yeah, I should say, it's a great lecture. I've seen it twice now. Mark, and I'm sorry, I've got a cold, so my voice sounds awful. Mark has a background in statistics, in genomics. He's been a neuroscientist. In addition to that, he's been a mentor for people in the Secular Student Alliance in the past, and for the last half decade has run the Richmond Humanist. So again, I'm really excited to have you on. This is a perfect show for you to be here. One thing I'd like to start with is a few months ago, I think I was whining about how we just haven't done enough for global warming. We're not paying attention to these important things that are going to affect the world. And you nodded sympathetically, said, yeah, it's a problem. But then you told me from your meeting in Cold Spring Harbor, you'd been talking to some other scientists and they had some more pressing concerns. Maybe you can go into those.
Well, I don't know that all scientists have a identical short list of the things that we should be worried about in the world, but I think many of them are concerned about two kinds of things. And one of them is the resurgence of infectious diseases, both in this country that many antibiotics are losing their effectiveness, and also in the emerging viruses coming from animals in particularly through the third world, but all throughout the world. And second, I think we worry about our own craziness as a species, that we are essentially Stone Age minds in space capsules, and we have all of this amazing technology at our disposal to do tremendously powerful things, but we haven't really changed our thinking. Yeah. And that's one thing we really need to understand, is how our own minds work.
It strikes me as especially funny, like here in the United States, where you think of us as the leading edge of technology, at least for a long time, and yet half of our population doesn't buy into science, into evolution, into just critical thinking, and it's leading to real problems now that we need this technology. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the antibiotics. When we first kind of stumbled upon those, they were extremely effective for a while before we had nearly the knowledge base we have now. So how come we've advanced so much in our technical understanding of how bacteria work, and yet we're falling behind in ways to treat bacteria?
Well, this is everyday evolution in action. So we don't normally see, evolution of a primate species like ourselves in real time, but in one person's lifetime, we can have hundreds of thousands of generations of bacteria, or millions of generations, and they will evolve to cope with the threats to their existence, which are antibiotics. So if a bacteria is an obligate pathogen, if it really needs human beings to get around, it's going to find ways, or it's going to stumble upon ways to defeat antibiotics, and those bacteria will tend to thrive. And of course,
and just to, you've got the statistical basis, but like you said, the human population, we might have a new generation every 20 years. The bacteria might do it every 20 minutes, and their population is just immense. So if you give something an incredible selective barrier that either you can deal with penicillin or you're wiped out, and you start with 10 million bacteria, you don't need half of them to survive it. You need a tiny percentage.
Yeah, you need 1 in a million to survive,
right.
And that's what you get. And yes, I think that's going to be a serious problem. Right now, this year, 20,000 Americans will die from antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Those people would have all lived if they had been treated 30 years ago. And this is a problem that's becoming pressing for us. Not to mention, of course, Ebola, which is what everybody's worried about right now, which is actually not untreatable. It's quite, you know, it's quite a treatable virus, but it needs a vaccine, and vaccine development has been stalled for Ebola for the last 15 years because it really hasn't been profitable for any of the companies with the resources to do it. Now, of course, it will be quite profitable.
Yeah, no, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, because we've had the wherewithal for a long time to start to address, to see, as scientists have, that antibiotic resistance is becoming a problem. Bacteria are also able to share things like through plasmids, where you can have one completely different bacterial line exchange genetic information and suddenly be resistant to 2 antibiotics or 3 antibiotics. So we've known in medicine for a long time this is a growing problem, and it's something that the more you understand about the mechanisms by which an individual type of bacteria replicates, you can get and interfere with any of those steps. But like you said, there's not the monetary drive. And if you put somebody on a cholesterol-lowering medicine, they're on that for life. And if you give them a successful antibiotic, you get 1 or 2 weeks. So, as a humanist leader, what do you think the role of money in medicine should be? Does there need to be some different strategy for the drug companies other than just maximizing profit if they're going to take care of the population?
Well, I'm not aware that taking care of the population is the reason for being of American corporations. We have, for a long time in this country, believed and proclaimed that if companies maximize their profits, they will necessarily maximize social welfare. This is not true, of course, but it's something that many people believe earnestly and can say without a blush. And a lot of people are willing to believe it. I think that it's unfortunate. I don't think it's an accident that the most promising, vaccine for Ebola is actually something that was developed in Canada, a country with 1/10 the population and much less medical infrastructure.
Now, Mark is a Canadian. We should just mention that in there, but I couldn't agree more about that.
Yeah.
Why don't we also just talk for a minute about the anti-vaccination movement? I'm not sure how familiar you are with that. How do we get the population where people believe in science enough, believe in critical thinking enough to actually look at some of the information out there, so that when people come spouting nonsense that's already been scientifically disproven, we don't still have churches in Texas telling their flock not to get vaccinated, and then you've got other people that suffer for it?
Yes. That's a good question, and I don't know an easy answer to that, Rob. It wasn't always this way. In fact, in the first half of the 20th century, America led the world in general education and in science education. We had more people finishing high school and a higher level of scientific literacy than any other country. Now we have slipped back quite a bit, and my view is that it's partly a matter of political will and partly a matter of paying for it. The cost of universities is increasingly being borne by students, and that's because states have pulled back funding from universities, and that's because taxpayers don't want to pay taxes. We're paying less taxes now than at almost any time since the 1930s, and we have more demands on the public purse, so one of those has to go. And it's not clear that in the American political conversation we're having now that either option is politically tractable.
Right. That's a point that came out, I forgot which politician, but when they were talking about Ebola and whether we're handling it well and why we haven't had some of the resources, they made the point that when you cut funding to the NIH by 10% or 20%, certain things simply have to go. So these political decisions we make really do have spillover into the real world and what scientists are able to achieve. Maybe you can talk about, with Ebola, the merits of waiting till it comes to our borders to address it versus trying to bottle it up?
Oh, I think there's no question that we have to deal with it where it is, because it's not something that you can bottle up. I think this is a fantasy, that there are always going to be people who are going to evade any kind of border patrol that you put up. I mean, people can certainly walk, if they have to, from the places where Ebola is into the Eurasian continent, can fly. Even if you banned all flights in Africa, which would be a terrible thing to do, you're going to have some people able to get into Europe and then into America. If you ban all flights entirely, you are going to end up crashing the world economy. So I just think that there's no practical way to address it except to go where it is.
Right, and just in terms of allocation of resources, if you have a relatively confined area, they can focus your resources and fix 95% of the problem. That's vastly easier than teaching everybody everywhere around the world this particular threat for this moment, and then 5 years from now we'll have some other infectious disease that we're not ready to handle, and that we don't have a lot of immunity in a given population. Let me jump to something else that during your talk today, you're from Canada, you mentioned something that we can do sort of for young children to change the way people, make them more humanist as they grow up. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that was the Roots of Empathy program. So the question that I got during the talk, and that I get every time when I give this talk, is that, to what extent is morality something that you're born with, or is it something that you can acquire? And of course, every parent asks themselves these questions as well. And I think that there's good evidence now that that empathy can to some extent be trained. Of course, the Buddhists have known this for 2,500 years, so it's not really anything new, but I think we now have empirical evidence that it's so, that in fact, that where this program, Roots of Empathy, comes into schools and actually gives people some practice in empathy in a sort of unguarded way, where they're looking at a new mother with a very young baby, and even the toughest guys seem to be willing to let down their guard a little bit and be willing to try to empathize with both the feelings of the baby and the attempts to communicate between the mother and the baby. This seems to be effective in reducing bullying and in generally increasing the ability of kids to show empathy, even those who wouldn't think of it as part of their character.
And what is I don't know if you'll know this or not, I don't. In terms of general parenting techniques in Canada, some people on the religious right here are very spare the rod, spoil the child, we're doing right to beat them. Does Canada do they have a different approach? Does this program address that at all?
I don't know that Canadian parenting is that different from American parenting. Maybe a little less competitive, a little less trying to get your kids into the right private schools from kindergarten on. But I'm not sure that corporal punishment is that different in Canada. I think in Sweden, where I lived for a couple of years, it was really a cause for shame. If you disciplined your kid physically on the bus or something, everybody would turn around and look at you very strangely. I don't know that, but I don't know that Canada's very different there.
Okay, and then the last bit, and then we'll wrap up, go to our break, and bring John Figdor on. The jihadi shootings in Canada recently, you can comment on that a little bit, and mostly what I'd like to focus on is the media response, compared what we've done here when we get some kind of disaster versus what happened there.
Well, I think that Canada responded with a great deal less of fireworks and hysteria than would have happened if the same thing had happened in the Houses of Congress here, and. The guard, who actually was a ceremonial guard, actually shot the guy, and there wasn't a lot of fuss. I think we should be careful about thinking of the attacker as a hardcore jihadi. He seems to have been a very troubled young man who spent some time looking in a variety of places for some coherence to his life. He seems to have found it in a mosque in Burnaby, BC, and apparently some radicals were hanging around the edges of that mosque and seems to have talked him into more radical points of view. But it's not clear at all, it's still not clear that there was anybody more than his deranged mind involved in this.
And in terms of media portrayal, What happens, as a neuroscientist, what happens inside your brain when you get all revved up and you're charged and you don't want to slowly think about it? How do we process things differently?
Well, I can just say very briefly, we have some data to suggest that there's much more activity in all the regions of your brain. They're communicating much more rapidly, and they're much more in lockstep and in sync. So there's much less balance and subtlety in the way you're processing information. But that's a much larger conversation to have at another time. And we should go to our...
All right. Well, we will save that for another time. We're going to go away to a public service announcement, and then we'll come back with John Figdor and talk about Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, or there'll be hell to pay.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom, and I was cleaning the bathroom one day, and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that! That's disgusting! Oh, poop already! You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
3, 2.
All right, welcome back. John, I'd like to thank you for joining the show today. If we can get you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, who this Lex Bayer guy is, and why the two of you wrote this book.
Sure. My name is John Figdor, and I'm the Humanist Chaplain of the Humanist Connection, and I work with the atheist, humanist, agnostic population at Stanford University. My co-author on this project is Lex Bayer, who is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and an executive at Airbnb. And today I'm really here to talk about my new book called Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart, Rewriting the Ten Commandments for the 21st Century.
So you don't think that the Ten Commandments we came up with a couple thousand years ago serve us well?
Yeah, let's just stick with that original draft. It's worked out so well for humanity in these last 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that your book, time didn't work out where we could read through it, but I understand that a lot of this is a workbook to help teach everybody out here how we can come up with our own list of 10. Do you want to maybe start, just give us a couple of the important ones that you guys came up with, and I don't know if you want to walk us through the process a little bit?
Sure. What's most important for people to take away from the book is that our answers are not the final conclusion. This is not a sermon, but a dialogue. What we're trying to do is get people to think about their own beliefs and analyze their own beliefs and figure out if they're making sense, figure out if they're living an authentic and happy and meaningful life. So we try to pull into the book observations we found from psychology, from philosophy, from the scientific method, from neuroscience, and that's kind of how we build our view. It's very much a test things out, repeatedly test them, and continue to reanalyze your views.
Could you tell us a little bit about what it's like being a humanist chaplain? What does that mean?
Sure. So this is a fairly new phenomena, the idea of humanist chaplains. And first I want to say that even though the term can be controversial because it is a religious term historically, we still use the term just because it gives us parity with the other religious campus ministers and chaplains on campus, because that's the accepted term. The job is such an interesting position. There's 6 of us right now. There's one of us at Harvard, one at Yale, one at Tufts, one at American University, and then obviously me at Stanford. And we have a plan to launch basically 1 or 2 of these a year for the near future. Humanist chaplains are in some ways similar to traditional chaplains in that we create community programming for students, and we do student counseling and things like that. But one of the major differences is that we don't believe in God, and that our services are really more of a community organizer type figure than a pure minister or chaplain type.
Of what the religious people call pastoral care. That is, do you have to deal with people in crisis, and what do you tell them when, you know, a student tells you that they want to commit suicide because their grades aren't very good and they're broken up with their girlfriend or what have you?
So that's a great question, and I think another major difference between humanist chaplains and humanist counseling and the way that religious figures do this is that a religious chaplain might try to troubleshoot that person's suicide ideation themselves, or they might try to solve someone's alcohol problem using religion, using the Bible, using something like that. And that's really scary to me. One of our views is that as humanists, we believe we should go where the science is indicating. We should go where research tells us that the most thoughtful research lies. And in this case, I don't think that chaplains should be performing really advanced psychotherapy. We're there as a resource to connect them to psychologists who are really much better equipped to take care of people's serious psychological problems. And I do find it somewhat irresponsible that traditional ministers will actually try to solve people's serious psychological problems with no advanced degree in psychology or counseling.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous point. I'm really glad you made it. We see with religion, we see with Scientology, where a lot of times people ignore the expertise that people might train as a psychiatrist, for you're college, then you got med school, then you go into a residency, then you might do a fellowship. There's a lot of training that goes into somebody developing expertise, and in the United States, we're starting to disregard a lot of the expertise, and people can have a gut feeling, and you almost treat it like that's just as important and just as valid as somebody who's actually done the research. And that's such a good point for you to make, that religion does not entitle you to act like you know all about other things, and people get hurt for it. And the same, just if you're an expert in one field, it doesn't mean you can suddenly talk about another field with the same authority, and people do it all the time, and we all suffer for it because the media no longer distinguishes. And that's so. Thank you for making that.
Now, what about the other aspects of what Christians regard pastoral care as, which is, what do you do with people who are physically ill? Supposing somebody's come down with the flu for a week,
Sure.
Do you intervene, or do you just say, "Well, we wish you well"?
Well, I can't intervene medically. I'm not a doctor.
No, I know you can't, but there's a lot of caregiving.
I'll visit people in the hospital. I'll visit them at home if they're recovering from something, a broken bone or something. They have limited mobility. I'm happy to do that. And something that I've found is that in these cases, it's more just having the willingness to show up and actually engage with people and be willing to take the time out of your day to make sure that they're doing okay and to check in on them in the way that you would want to be checked in on if you weren't a problem.
Mm-hmm. All right. I have another question about both in your work as a humanist chaplain, but also through the book. How much of your interaction is through young secularists and atheists and humanists that are already, decided they don't believe in the supernatural, and how much of it are you trying to reach out to religious people and say there really is a valid alternative way to go through life, being happy, being moral, and things like that?
So that's a fantastic question. I would say that we wrote the book ultimately because I kept having students come up to me and say, look, John, I don't believe in God. I've given up my belief in supernaturalism, but I want to know what next. And I don't just want an answer. I don't just want you to give me this is what you should believe. I want a process. I want to see a dialogue of ideas. And so that's kind of who we wrote the book for, and that's the attitude of the book. It's for people who have kind of just given up their belief in God and they're wondering what happens next. It's also helpful, I think, for religious people to find out about what atheists, agnostics, and humanists do believe. There's so many books out there that talk about what we don't believe that it's really a shame that people are really unaware of the positive use and value of atheism. So that's really the other reason we wrote the book, is to educate people about what atheists and humanists do, not just what we don't.
Mm-hmm. Could you say, you mentioned that you're dealing with people who have just lost their faith in God. What do you do with people who come to you who you may encounter who are losing their faith in God? What do you do with the people who are worried about what's coming next? You know, how their world is falling apart?
That's an interesting question. So I think that a lot of people, by the time that they come to visit me, they're well along the road to doubt. Mm-hmm. They're at minimum not believing the traditional stories that we've heard. But I definitely think it's a good point that these students they're looking for guidance, but they're not looking for the answers. They're looking for a conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having a little difficulty hearing, so sorry if we hesitate a little bit. Can you give anything, do you want to walk us through again? So we understand that lots of people need that guidance. How do they start to go through and develop a rational way to approach the world morally and be happy about it?
Sure, so that's a great question. One of the things that we think we should do in the book is that your beliefs should be consistent, and they should be reliable, and they should be testable. So when you make a claim, what we think you ought to do is ask yourself, say you believe in, one of our claims is that we believe there's an objective reality. We think that if you're going to make an argument, you ought to have reasons for why you think this is true, and you ought to at least consider the reasons why other people think their view is true, if it's different from yours. So one of our checks is survey the literature, find out what other people think about the subject, and then put your own view forward. And then once you have your own view, you can't just rest on your laurels and say, oh, I found out my list of 10 commandments, I'm done, that's it. No, our view is that you have to continually talk with other people about your ideas, talk about the values that you've developed, and continue this thought of, are these the most authentic values? Are these the most humanistic values I can be living?
So tell us a little bit about this process. You've mentioned that this is a dialogue rather than a set of commandments, but could you give us perhaps a few of these non-commandments that, as you describe them in your book, and then perhaps walk us through some of this process of formulating your own values?
Sure. Let's talk about probably the most controversial claim in the book that we make, which is that morality is subjective, not objective, right? And let's go through our reasoning process on this. So broadly, there's two kind of main views about morality. There's one view, which is the objective moral view, which says that morality exists for all time. These are moral objective facts. They're true regardless of where you are in the universe or what time you are in the universe. They're just true of the world. This is not our view. Our view is something different. Our view is subjective view of morality. And in the subjective view of morality, what we say is that people actually create morality through cooperation. So we rely on the research done by Professor Axelrod on the evolution of cooperation. We refer to concepts like the social contract view of morality, and we suggest that it's more plausible to view morality as something that's constructively created by different societies, and that's why you see subtle differences between cultures. So one of these that's so difficult to explain is the difference between Asian societies, like Confucian societies, and very Western ones, which focus on individualism. So in Confucian societies, in some of them, they actually have laws where children are legally required to take care of their aging grandparents in the same way that parents are required to take care of their children. This is because family values are extremely important to this way of thinking. And so their focus is on a slightly different value, this family value thinking, rather than our value of individualism. And it doesn't seem clear to me that one of these is obviously right and the other one is obviously wrong. It seems like people who grew up in a Confucian society, they have very good reasons for why they think family is the most important and why they structure their morality that way. And I take them at that.
It's funny, family values here in the United States seems to be you listen to your parents or you're going to get hit. And if you're a woman,
yes,
you
very
be quiet. And so it's funny to hear you say that because that's, you know, that feels like a much more Christ-like set of family values that they have over, you know, outside of America.
More humanistic, at least.
Right, more human, right. The Christ as the humanist.
Well, could you perhaps give us a couple other examples of these uncommandments as you describe them?
Sure. Well, sorry, did you want to continue along this point of subjective morality? Because I know that you
I'd like to ask you a little bit about subjective morality, but I'd like to finish the rest of it first.
Sure. So one of the best examples that we use in the book for considering subjective and objective morality is this example from Jean-Paul Sartre's Existentialism as a Humanism. He gives us the example of a young man who's considering, should I go and join the resistance and fight the Nazis, or should I stay home and take care of my ailing mother? Our view is that, look, there is no right and wrong answer. It's not that one of these is the right thing to do and the other one is wrong. Our view is that whichever choice the young man makes in this circumstance will tell us about his moral framework and about what he values. So if this young man has been brought up and raised in an environment where he has really been taught to take care of people, he's been taught that serving is the most important value, or maybe that medicine is the most important thing you can do to help people, he's probably going to be inclined to stay with his ailing mother and take care of her. On the other hand, if this young man is really interested in the idea of standing up for one's freedom, or maybe protecting people who can't protect themselves, then he's going to be much more inclined towards becoming a soldier and fighting against the Nazis and the resistance. So in my mind, it seems like objective morality doesn't have a very clear lens on how to address cases like this. It seems like they would have to say that one choice is better than the other. And that just doesn't seem true to me. It seems like instead, this is a case where there's not one right choice, but there's two right choices. And that what we're really figuring out is what this person's moral values are. What is their moral compass? So when someone says that they're going to take care of their ailing mother, that tells you their compass is oriented towards care, towards empathy, towards compassion. When someone tells you that they're going to join the resistance and fight the Nazis, that tells you their moral compass is about protection of the innocent and defense.
I mean, you can certainly put people in situations where they don't have any good option, and you know, then I can see where you're talking about it's there's not an absolute God-given right or wrong. You can also have a situation where you can either hit somebody because nobody's watching, or you can help somebody across the street, where, you know, with Sam Harris and the moral landscape, it seems like there's clearly one way to lead to more happiness for the larger, you know, set of people. Where does subjectivity come in on something like that?
Sure. So Sam Harris's moral landscape is a really interesting idea. And we actually really think the metaphor is extremely useful, that there's different worldviews out there, and they have different ways of maximizing people's interests. And some of them are better than others of them. So we think the moral landscape is a wonderful book. But where I disagree with Sam is that he thinks he's found an objective system of morals. And I don't think that's true. And the reason I don't think that's true is because he hasn't shown how his system is truly objective. So it's based off the subjective welfare of creatures, right? He has this neuroscientific view, which is like pain or something like that, or that consciousness is valuable in an end, and we ought to, we can compare different moral systems in how they distribute pain and pleasure, right? All that gives you is a subjective view of what he happens to think the most important value is, right? That's not necessarily a universal value. I mean, Sam Harris thinks he's found the objective moral truth. Immanuel Kant also thinks that he's found the objective moral truth. And Peter Singer disagrees with Sam Harris and has a view of utilitarianism, which he says is actually objectively morally binding. I don't see how all of these could possibly be true, and I don't see how they're compatible with each other. So it seems to me like actually what we're finding out with these different moral systems is different people's preferences and different people's attributes are influencing what kind of system they think is most important.
You may have run into before about this, which is, okay, let's say my subjective morality is I value making people feel good. And I'm a businessman and an entrepreneur, and I go out and talk up my company, and I give people wonderful, warm feelings about my company, and they these are really inspirational events, and people give money to my company and pay me lots of money, and I live very well. We don't actually produce anything. And there's no shares return, nothing returned to shareholders, but everybody feels really good, and I feel really good, and I'm living well. So everybody wins, and this is my subjective morality. What do you have to say about that?
So one of our points about subjective morality is that, in our view, empathy and compassion are just baked into it from the start. So this goes back to the fact that we think that morality is ultimately derived from cooperation. So Professor Axelrod in The Evolution of Cooperation, especially in the example of the tit-for-tat game in game theory, has shown that nice theories, nice behaviors, actually ultimately work out better for the participants than more aggressive strategies that might be called sneaky or something like that. And so on one level, we have the fact that just baked into it, we have empathy and compassion. At a second level, we have the idea that since this is a cooperatively based, someone who's developing a system has to have whatever product they're going to develop has to be valuable to other people. So with this cooperative view, if it's useful to other people, then it will be useful. And then to the last part, it's also baked in, this idea of compassion is so strong because, as I'm sure you're aware of with neuroscience research, we're aware that we kind of can't help but feel what other people are feeling. Mirror neurons are these neurons where apparently when we see someone else in pain or we see someone else happy, we experience a slightly similar version of that in our own, we perceive it ourselves. And I can tell you, I've had this experience of, as a humanist chaplain, I perform weddings, funerals, baby namings, and I was at a funeral yesterday for someone who I'd never met before. But, watching all of the other people who were so sad and so touched and so moved at this funeral service, it was activating the same senses of sadness in me. It was making me feel that. And that real empathy and compassion is the crux of our moral system. And we think that it's fairly well established that humans act through these patterns.
I might disagree with you a little bit there, John. First of all, I think there's a very active controversy in the neuroscience community about whether mirror neurons really have anything to do with empathy or whether it's a separate system. But let's grant that empathy seems to provoke very distinctive signatures of brain activity, which we can talk about another time. But there are certainly individuals for whom there's really no brain activity at all in these regions associated with empathy, and that if I might be one of these individuals, I like to have a good time. I like other people to have a good time. They're paying, and I'm living well. And what's to complain about? Nobody's being physically hurt. They're giving a lot of money to me, and everything's fine. And it's my subjective morality that things are good. What's wrong with that?
It almost sounds like you're describing religion. Is that kind of what you're doing here? So I don't see. So take the problem of psychopaths, which is I think what you're referring to, right? People who don't have this empathetic center in their brain, right? So a psychopath who pursues a strategy of trying to maximize their own interests at the cost of other people is going to have immediate problems. As soon as he tries to get people to cooperate with him, once people find out that he's conniving and tricking them and has ulterior motives operating, it's going to be way harder for him to cooperate in the future. So take someone like Bernie Madoff, who had no empathy and no compassion for years. He just took money from people, and he gave them the illusion of continuing to create wealth. Well, now Bernie Madoff's in jail, and we know not to trust him anymore. We've basically destroyed his reputation because we know that he's not a trustworthy person. So trust is an important feature in this system, and especially in our digital age where your reputation can be tracked so easily online, the ability to lie, the ability to cheat, the ability to manipulate people, it's just much diminished from what it used to be. It's too easy to catch people with lies now. There's too much video of it.
I mean, if I can disagree again, and we may be going off topic, but we'll come back. But who has gone to jail for all the lies that led into the 2008 financial crisis, which pulled trillions of dollars out of many people's accounts and housing? Many, many millions of people suffered, and yet nobody's gone to jail for those lies.
Right, so that's, I think,
nobody's lost their job.
Of justice. Like, so we actually have laws in the books that we think people have broken, and I think this is a problem of our justice system not pursuing these claims. I mean, if you're asking me why politically we're not engaging these, I think that's a different question. On a moral level, I would say that these people, look, so we can't tell them you're living the wrong life, but we can say, does it seem like a good life if you are sucking all of this capital out of the economy and leaving other people in abject misery? Does that seem like a good thing? And we can actually walk someone through the fact that living in a society where people are generally friendly and people live in a high quality of life is better for everyone in that society. Because, I mean, so I know people who are quite wealthy who live in countries in India, and they've moved out of these places because they feel so uncomfortable being surrounded by people who are in abject poverty. This strikes me as the wrong conclusion to make. The conclusion to make should be, we want to make sure that everyone is doing well so that our society is happier, so that we can live in a place where everyone is able to enjoy a high comfort of life. Yeah, and I think that people who have children can understand this well. You don't think to yourself, when you have 5 or 10, if you have 3 or 4 children, how am I going to maximize my interests? You often think, well, I've had a good time in life. I want to make sure that my children have a good go as well. And so this factors in as well. We're used to people making decisions not based on their own pure self-interest. We know that people make decisions based on their family, based on their other preferences, and that these are perfectly moral.
Even here in the United States, though, people are living in abject poverty, maybe not as bad as in third world countries or in different places, but we're surrounded by poverty, and people seem at the top happy to chug along and act like it's not happening and have whole media networks to keep people thinking it's not happening. And then on a second thing I just don't want to forget, I understand the empathy and compassion and how that's built into us, but you have religious systems or even just ideological systems that are more than happy to suppress half of the population and have been doing it for hundreds of years. So I understand some of what you're saying on a theoretical level, but good ideas don't necessarily win out. A lot of time power wins out, and so I'm not sure how the subjective morality addresses that issue.
Sorry, can you rephrase the question? I don't quite understand what you're going for there.
You were saying that our system, we're intrinsically based on compassion and empathy, and that's just built into it from the get-go, right?
Yeah, sorry, our view. So one of the problems.
But what I'm saying is that we have a lot of world systems that may be built in, but all the women are suppressed. So how do you square those two?
Sure. Well, one of the problems we have is we have a serious authenticity problem in this country, where we have politicians that claim to be religious people, claim to have values about treating the poor well, and then if you look at their voting record, they consistently vote against the interests of the poor. So I think that we have a problem. This is something else that the book is talking about, which is it's important that your words match your actions, and that you don't just talk empty, that you actually are consistent, and that you lead an authentic and meaningful life. And so someone who says, I'm so in favor of the poor, I want to make sure that the poor are protected, and then consistently votes against food stamp access or something like that, I would say they're openly being hypocritical, and that they're not living consistent with their own values. And I think pointing this out when we see this more often would be helpful as a society. When someone says, I'm a compassionate and person who loves the poor, but meanwhile they have millions of dollars in the bank and they don't do charitable works, then I would say, well, do you really care about the poor? You don't seem to be living consistently with that value.
Atheists are given a lot of latitude on whether or not they're obligated to come out or whether it's helpful for society for them to come out. Do you feel that's different with humanists? Do you feel that humanists, to be a true humanist, you need to be politically engaged in calling people out when they're saying one thing and doing something that hurts society?
I think they're slightly different questions, but I definitely think it's worthwhile for people to come out as atheists or as humanists or as agnostic. Honestly, I don't care which label people choose. They're all valuable and they all have different meanings. But I just think that we need to create a context where more and more people are comfortable to be outwardly non-religious. And I have phenomenal good news to share with you guys about this. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a new poll released by Barna Research. Barna Research is a Christian polling organization. They're usually trying to help churches run more effective programs. They recently found out that 38% of the U.S. population is non-religious by their 38%. That's an astonishingly high number.
I'm sorry, is that for 30 and under, or is that for what age bracket is that?
Sorry, this is from the Barna poll that came out most recently. I have information up on it on my website.
And what age bracket are you talking about? Is that the whole population?
No, that's the whole population.
Wow, no.
See, previous to that, the highest numbers we've ever heard was 32% under the age of 30, which was a very high number. But this is even higher than that, and it's not specific to young people. This is all over. And so I think that we're trending towards a place where people aren't looking to these ancient books for their values. They're not looking to the Bible, to the Quran, to the Torah for their moral views. They want something based in reason, science, evidence, something that's based in modern thinking and embraces Enlightenment values.
So what kinds of bases for moral values do you find that your students who are coming to you find compelling? I mean, when you try to ground morality in science, or Enlightenment values, what are you referring to? What kind of arguments or what kind of foundations do people find compelling?
So if you're asking me about the kinds of questions that students ask me, one I frequently deal with is students who come to me and they say, John, I really want to work on improving education in the world. So I'm tempted to either, when I graduate, work for Teach for America, or I'm tempted to work in a consulting firm, make money for a while, and then after I've made a little bit of money and have a little bit of security, then I can quit my job and go into the service world and be a teacher in an inner city school or something like that. And this is, I was stunned at how frequently I have these sorts of conversations about deep values with students. It shows me that young people these days really are thinking about, where am I going to spend my time? Where am I going to allocate my resources? What problems are worth me solving? And so I see them asking questions about, how do they balance their preferences? How do they balance their long-term preferences with their short-term preferences? How do they balance their desires to have a family with their desire to do something good? These are all questions that they ask. And when we walk through these questions with them, what we're asking them are, well, what are your values? What are your preferences? What are your skills? What are your talents? If someone isn't skilled at being a doctor, it doesn't really behoove them to go and try and follow a medical degree if they think that's the most important thing to do. We think that what people do in their lives ought to be based off of their talents, predispositions, preferences, and their own skills. And so when we have these conversations about ethics, what we're talking about is balancing your preferences and your happiness.
I guess one point I'd like to make about that is when you come from a very disadvantaged place, you would hate to cut people off, or I know this is not what you're suggesting, but you wouldn't want to cut a kid off in the 7th grade and say, look, you're not good at math, let's head you toward a janitorial career. And I think a lot of minorities do actually face that kind of very negative guidance, which again, I know you're not going there, but it's something that we do need, right, we do need that kind of, as a humanist, to sort of equalize the opportunity and the education for everybody so that they can see by the time they're 18, am I good at this? Is this something I'd like to explore further? Sort of in that vein, do you do anything to help teach critical thinking skills to young kids or point them in a direction to get that?
Sure, that's a great, so we're actually trying to launch a program, actually it'll be launching in January of this year with the humanist community of Silicon Valley to provide quality children's programming, kind of from that kindergarten through 6th or 7th grade range. And we do want to talk about critical thinking with these folks. We want to talk to them about science literacy. We want to talk to them about all of these kinds of questions.
So, how would you describe what you're advocating and how you're working with people as different from what, say, a Unitarian Universalist minister would do? In what way are you different from, say, that kind of very liberal kind of religion?
Great question. Unitarian Universalists are probably the closest thing you can find to humanists. And the reason for that is that within Unitarian Universalism, one of their branches or sub-traditions is humanism. So there are people who are UU ministers and are trained as humanists. For example, one of my former students, Charlotte Arsenault, is now a hospital chaplain, I believe, at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. So yeah, we do have people heading to these. I'm sorry, I forgot. What was the question again?
So how is what you're advocating different from, say, what Unitarian Universalists do?
Right. So while there are a number of similarities, while we often share worldviews, one of the differences is that Unitarian Universalism embraces a wide variety of perspectives, all the way from theistic Unitarian Universalism, where you believe in a God and this God has commandments for people, all the way through atheism, agnosticism, and skepticism. And it makes it kind of difficult, I would think, to have a coherent community if you have some people who believe in pure theism and then you have other people who are rationalistic humanists. It just doesn't seem like a very comfortable mix, because one group of people are prioritizing critical thinking and the scientific method, and another group of people are prioritizing, I guess, the message of revelation, which is kind of directly contradicted by a lot of science and our modern understanding. So I think the difference is that as a humanist chaplain, I'm not forced to deal with the contradiction, a kind of discomfort within the organization that I work with. As humanists, we're pretty comfortable saying that we don't believe in God or gods, we don't believe in supernaturalism, and the same thing for atheist agnostics as well.
Mm-hmm. So John, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Can you tell us about the contest on your website, how people can look into that, and sort of, how that's going to work?
So we want to encourage people to visit atheistmindhumanistheart.com. atheistmindbook.com. You can find out all about our book and more about our contest. This is what we're really excited about. As I mentioned before, even though we come up with our own list of 10 non-commandments, our answers is not the important thing here. It's getting people to rethink about their own beliefs and to come up with their own internal list of values and beliefs. And so we created this contest. It's a $10,000 contest with 10 $1,000 prizes where people can submit their beliefs and then a short justification for why they think their belief is not only true, but important and reasonable. And so we're encouraging people to participate in this contest, submit your beliefs, and then we'll have a panel of celebrity judges. We have all sorts of fantastic folks. You can see the full list on the website who are going to vote on the finalists. And then people are going to walk away with thousands of dollars in prizes just for taking the time to rethink their beliefs and to ask themselves, am I leading a life that's consistent with the values that I preach?
And since we're talking about money here and you're an atheist, can I assume you're going to invest this in waterboarding technology, or what are you planning to do with the profits from this?
Well, I actually appreciate that. So after our advance, I plan to donate all of our additional proceeds back to my organization, the Humanist Connection, so we can reinvest that money in creating quality programs for atheists, humanists, and the non-religious, both in Stanford area and in Silicon Valley.
That's great. And just to be clear, at least one of your websites is called atheistmindhumanistheart.com. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Any other specific things that you want to make sure we cover about the book in the last couple of minutes? Either any critical points that you think most of us should consider important for a moral life?
I think we actually got through a fair bit on this book. Let me think. Yeah, no, I think we covered pretty much everything I wanted to get through today.
All right, let me jump to something else then. We did a show, or David Tamayo did a show with Sarah Levin a couple weeks ago talking about death and dying. Religion and religious chaplains really push people, instead of figuring out what's best for them, to dying in a certain way, which really seems very inhumane. What's your approach to that as a humanist?
Oh, yeah, this is a really troublesome problem. So I believe strongly in death with dignity. I believe that people have the right to choose if they want to end their life when they're suffering from terminal disease or something like that. And I find it really unconscionable the way that we continue to allow Christian values just to dictate what we can and can't do in our society. Thankfully, we have a few states that are reasonable, including Oregon, directly to my north here, which has death with dignity laws, and hopefully we'll see these laws being embraced by more states as our country becomes less Christian. And again, as I mentioned, this Barna poll with the results, we're dealing with a groundswell of non-religious people right now. I mean, there really is more support for this view of life than there ever has been in American history. And I think it's really exciting that we're building a new American culture, and hopefully it'll have more humanistic and more secular values behind it.
Hey, you know, given this enormous chunk of secular people that are coming out, do you have any feelings on why our politics is still so guided by religious right principles in some areas? You know, with abortion and women's rights and...
You know, that's a difficult question, and I'm not a political scientist, but I would have to say that at this point, it has to be related to the fact that some of these churches have enormous budgets, and those budgets are tax-free. So we have this strange situation in the U.S. where religious institutions are tax-free, but a secular charity would not necessarily be tax-free to the same extent in terms of they're able to offer parsonage exemptions and all sorts of other property tax exemptions that are kind of ridiculous. And it's my view that if we just taxed all of this, we treated everyone equally, like there should a domestic violence shelter shouldn't be treated differently than a minister, at least shouldn't be treated preferentially, then I think we'll be in a much better place. And I think secular Americans are much more inclined to view government that way.
And also a lot of these, I guess, religious places, you might go somewhere for one type of help, but part of the help comes with getting proselytized to, and we need to separate those out again. We're good? Yeah,
I'd like to end just with asking one question. You're speaking to us from what looks like your library. There's a shelf of books behind you. I think I can see Better Angels of Our Nature just right to your left ear.
I'll plug my own book there.
Right. Now, could you tell us, you know, which books have really shaped your thoughts? What do you think have really made a difference? What would you really recommend as really striking humanist reading?
About 30 seconds.
That's just a great question. So in terms of books, I love Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature. I'm a huge fan of that. I'm a big fan of research into game theory. Let me see if it's this name. Professor Bruce Bueno de Mesquita has a book on game theory that I'm a very big fan of. And then, you know, the classics, Aristotle, Plato, all of those.
John, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time. Join us next week. David Meyer and I will have Greta Christine on to talk about coming out atheist. See you next time.